So the landmark report into the effective blood scandal is to be released in just under 2 hours.
The Prime Minister will apologise after tens of thousands of people were given contaminated blood.
It's been called the worst treatment disaster in NHS history. And joining us now is Sharon Davies, former Olympic swimmer, who, until this morning, Sharon, neither Andrew or I knew that your mother was one of the victims of this scandal. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, Mum was amazing. She's my mum. We all say that about mums, don't we? But she was a very quiet, very reserved kind of person. She didn't smoke, she didn't drink, she hardly left Plymouth. She worked in the MOD down there in the civil service until she was 70. She didn't take a single penny of anything from the government ever in support. And I think she just kept quiet about this condition. We knew as a family, and she died in 2017 prematurely, like 3,000 other people have so far, and 2 a week are still dying because of this terrible silent killer, Hep C. And of course, you know, the haemophiliacs, I mean, that were given these drugs and plasma in the 70s and the 80s died much quicker. And it's also, I think it was the stigma as well that went around it, which was so awful. I mean, I was listening this morning and there was one young man that was talking about how his parents had died and then he became the HIV kid in primary school and none of the other children were allowed to play with him. And so people, you know, the young people that are around today just can't understand how awful this situation was during that period of time. And this has been 40 years that people have been trying to ask for justice, but more importantly, they've been asking for clarity and transparency and for people to be held responsible for this, you know, because this blood was being brought in from America, primarily from prisons, from people that were drug addicts, and given to people here in the UK, often without any of their knowledge. And for Mum, you know, she had this operation, this gallbladder operation in the 70s, didn't really know she had hepatitis until the 1990s because nobody was testing for them. They were just given all sorts of other, you've got a cold, you've got arthritis, you've got this. You know, eventually found out she was hepatitis C. She got a great specialist to look after her. Sadly, he went to Australia and then she got somebody else and she went downhill very quickly from there. And she died, you know, as I said, in 2017. And she's very typical, I think, of a lot of people that got the hepatitis C blood, you know.
What was your mum's attitude, Sharon? I mean, because you wouldn't blame her if she was bitter.
She wasn't. I mean, that was the thing that was amazing. I suppose my mum was of that era where she just idolised the NHS in a lot of ways. And towards the end, the NHS really seriously let her down. Because of her age, she was sidetracked. So she used her savings and I went with her to Harley Street to see a specialist. And he said if he'd come 6 months earlier, he could have operated and removed the cancerous part of her liver. But he said it was now too late. And that all he could do was offer her a drug that would make her very poorly, may prolong her life by a couple of months, but would put her in bed. And we talked her out of it and said, look, you know, you've maintained your dignity and independence. Let's do this to the very end. And we made sure that she was at home where she wanted to be with her family. But I you know, she could be seeing her grandchildren now and what they're up to if you know, this hadn't happened to her, as it has happened to, as we know already, 3,000 people, but it will be much bigger than this. You know, it's much likely to be closer to 6,000 people, because if you look at the number of people that have been infected and how hepatitis C works, it's quite a slow killer. So anybody out there that, you know, possibly thinks, go and get your test, because I'm hoping one of the things that will come out of today will be that the NHS will now have to support these people, make their records available to everybody instead of putting blockages in the way, and test anybody that thinks that they might have hepatitis C that was given to them, or, you know, and then treat them properly with dignity and give them as much support as possible. And we need aid to go to those people that are dying right now. No amount of money is going to bring my mum back, but people that are dying now in abject poverty because of this need our support right now, and that's really important.
Does it infuriate you, Sharon, that we are just so slow at this? They sorted this out in France in 1999. Compensation was paid, prosecutions were made. Here we are, 2024, and we still haven't got the flipping report yet.
And Andrew, isn't it a pattern of a behaviour which is really quite worrying? You know, with so many scandals, post office scandal, you know, it's exactly the same. It's kicking the can down the road instead of acknowledging we've made a mistake and now let's do what we can to correct it. And I think that's the thing that's the most galling for all these people that have been suffering and watching their families die, you know, that nobody is really accepting responsibility. And you mentioned France. I mean, they even prosecuted their health minister. You know, and I think Japan were the same. America, a lot of the drug companies have given out millions in compensation. And this was years and years ago. You know, here we are 40 years later, and we're still asking for acknowledgement of what was done.
Do you think, Sharon, your experience of this injustice is what has partly driven your energy towards the other campaigns that you've been involved in? I know you weren't a fan of COVID vaccine mandates with the drug companies, and also with your transgender campaigning as well. This sense that the little guy or girl needs somebody fighting on their behalf.
Yeah, I think possibly. I mean, you know, Mum was this wonderfully calm, hugely supportive, reliable person that this injustice was done to. I suppose there was a number of things in my life. You know, the East German situation where we had these East German athletes full of drugs and nobody was doing anything about it. So I suppose I do have this big streak in me that says I just want to fight for justice and fairness and transparency. And I just think that I worry about democracy. You know, we're losing the voice of the people seems to be getting lost at the moment. And that's really important.
It is. And thank goodness for people like you, Sharon Davies. Thank you so much for joining us.